Hello, everyone. So, one of the viewer suggestions for topic happened to be kitchen witchery, and I thought I would talk about that. Now, that is a topic that has multiple subtopics within it, so it's going to be more than one video for that. So, tonight I'm going to just talk about empowering our food. Now, for starters, I want to say that when I talk about kitchen witchery, I do it like I do pretty much everything else in life. It's very eclectic, taken from multiple sources and examples, plus my own little tweaks. Because, like I said, my favorite thing about magic is we can make it our own. So, yeah, spirituality as a whole, make it our own. So, to the food and empowering the food. So, food has always been forever. It's always been a major part of, or not a major part, but it's always been a part of spiritual paths, magic, religious rituals. Food has always been connected to spiritual working because of the fact that we have to have food to live. It is literally a life source, it gives us life. So, food is seen not only as an offering, to deity for thank you for giving us this life, but as a way of this is life given to us. Because did we not have that, we would die. So that's why it is so important and so easily used for the things we need in life. Now, one of the ways you can do this, in general, what you're doing when I say empowering your food is instead of gathering all your ingredients and doing like a spell, you're just gathering your ingredients, gathering what you need, and putting that intent into the food that you will either be serving to the person who's supposed to be receiving it or eating it yourself if it's for you. When you're putting that energy and that spell work into the food, the meal itself becomes your spell and the focus you put into it. Now, one of the ways to do that is, of course, with herbs. We all know herbs have medicinal purposes, but they also have spiritual and magical aspects that people use. And that part, I will say, there are many herbs and spices and whatnot that can be used for specific needs in magic. There are those that can be used for multiple needs, depending on what your need is. But whether or not a specific need matches with a specific herb, you can still use it for whatever your need is if it is something that in your brain connects with that need. It's also important to know that if there is an intent you have and one of the herbs that is used for that frequently is one that you don't have that association with it or you have a negative association with it, don't use it. Don't make yourself use it because it was written in a book. Because your intent and your focus is going to still be more powerful. You have to remember when we do any kind of work, magically speaking, these things, the ingredients, all of it, these are tools. Yes, they do have their own energies, but it's still tools and techniques we use to trigger our energy and our focus and our intent on the working. So if you've got an herb or spice in your working that you have a negative connection to, say a certain smell or flavor that you have a bad memory from childhood of that smell or flavor, that is going to be in your mind when you're working with it, when you're smelling it, when you're tasting it. And you don't want to risk putting that negativity into your working. So it's okay to just don't use it. it's also okay to use things that other people don't necessarily associate with that intent because your brain associates it that way. Um, there are correspondences and things that go along with everything we use in spell work these days. But other cultures, other time periods had different correspondence. That's just a normal thing, depending on where you are, what your culture are, what your beliefs are, where you're located, what your income is. Different things have different meanings to different people. So it is okay if sugar for you is something that is more of a financial thing than a sweetening up thing. There was a time period when sugar was included in prosperity work because in certain places and times, that was an expensive thing to get. You didn't get sweets often. So that was used in workings for prosperity because if you had the sugar, you had money. So everything is tweakable. That's the number one thing. So when you're doing this, yeah, and then the other thing would just be make sure you're matching your matching your flavors, so to speak. You don't want to put rosemary in a dessert. Well, I mean, depending on, but you know what I mean. You want the flavors to match up. You don't want it to be something you can't eat or it's not going to taste good enough for you to eat because you're not going to be taking it in. Because that's the whole process, is taking it into yourself, or the person receiving it, taking it into themselves and their life. And what you're going to do is just like you would do a spell. You're going to put those herbs into your food and focus that energy in whatever way your path does and put it into the food. Focus it into the food. Some people will literally get out their wands and do it. Some people have, especially those who do kitchen witchery a lot, they'll have like wooden spoons that are specifically for when they're doing magic, and that is their wand as they are stirring, just for that purpose. And you're focusing that into the food, and then when you go to eat it, you're going to be focusing on, you are bringing that into yourself. Another way to do that is you can do that with like eggs. For Ostara spring equinox, my son and I used to take the idea of Easter eggs, since they were ours first anyway, and we would take our colored eggs, but then we would infuse them and focus our energy and intent on what we wanted to bring into that year. Then we would crack open the egg and eat it. That was one of our ways of doing it, and focus on bringing those things into us, into our lives. Same thing you're doing here. Now, for me, I personally like to do the it's very Wiccan-like, where you are bringing the energy from the ground. You put the roots into the ground and you bring it up. Bring the energy from the earth into you, and from the crown, from the heavens down into you. You let it mingle and use that to push through, focus into the food or drink. That's just the way I do it. But again, the point is you're putting that energy and intent into the food before you eat it. And then you're focusing when you take it in. Another way people do that, or another thing people like to include, is when they are stirring, you'll do the stirring in the direction based on what it is, if you are sending or receiving. Usually for most people, that's going to be going, clockwise, where you are sending it out to someone. So if you're making it for another person, you're going to do it to the right. You're going clockwise. You're sending. And then with receiving, something drawing into yourself, into your life, you're going to be pulling it counterclockwise to be receiving. But again, don't have to. It's your intent. But those are just like typical ways people are known to do it. And I found it works for me as well. Even without herbs, you can still do this. It doesn't have to be herbs. It can be purely the intent and energy. It could also be papers, like what people would call name papers or prayer papers, intention papers, manifestation, everybody, whatever paper you want to name it, where you say you've got a drink and you write down what it is you're trying to draw in. Make it real thin, write it on the paper, put it in the drink. Focus that energy along with the paper, and then you're going to drink it, and you're drinking it into you. Some people will say drink until you get the paper out, and then you keep it with you. Some people will do something special with the paper. Some people, and actually a lot, especially if you're cooking with it, or if it's a really big deal, you want to let the paper fully dissolve in the drink, and you're going to drink it down or eat it if it's food, but you're taking it into you. Most traditions do tend to go ahead and take it into themselves. Another way to do that, especially if it's food, is you could actually make the intention paper, burn it, put the ash into the food. Same way you do the paper or whatever, again, with the energy, and you stir it in. And, if you've got enough that it's not going to, you don't want to make it big, food's got to taste good. But that's another way to do it, so you can get it in there without having to do a whole lot extra. And again, even without herbs or paper or whatever, you can simply focus that energy and that intent into whatever it is you're cooking, eating, drinking, and do it that way with just the pure intent and energy, however you prefer. You don't even have to you can light candles. You can light incense to get your mind in that place. But that's also not required. If you have the right amount of intent and focus on it, go for it. One of my favorite stories with that, because I still to this day, I think it's hilarious, was I was a nanny many years ago, but my pay was pretty much food, room, and board, so I didn't have my own money. So I was going to get a job for while the child was at school. And the day I had an interview for a job I had no experience in and had not worked for 3 years, I was 18 and I hadn't had a job since I was, 15 or 16. And other than the nanny gig. So job I never had any experience in, really my first real job since I was young and, sacking groceries. And I took a toaster strudel out of the freezer, fixed it for breakfast, and wrote with the little icing pack that you drizzle it with. And I made a dollar sign and focused on getting that job. Ate it, took the new job into myself, and went on to the interview, and I had the job before I left. They didn't even do we'll call you back. I got the job on the spot, again, with no experience. By all accounts, I shouldn't have gotten the job. I'm glad I did. But to this day, I chalk that up to a well-energized and doodled toaster strudel. So it does not have to be fancy, and it doesn't have to be anything real magic in the aesthetic sense. You can literally just put that energy in. I like to do the old triangle thing to focus it better. That's just me. Again, do it how you will. I'll also do that with my morning coffee. Um, what I used to do, and I need to start doing again, because I need to not be lazy, is every morning I would have one thought, positive thing that I would focus and put into my morning coffee and drink that in. And it did work. Um, Again, I got lazy, but that's another thing you can do. Um, Another important thing to remember, though, is whether this is something you are making and the magic is aimed at or towards another person, or whether it's something for you, whatever the case, you want to make sure that you don't leave it where other people get it. Only those it's intended for will get it. Or be very specific in the focus and intent part, to make sure that it does not affect anyone else, especially if you have people around who may go rummaging through the fridge and eat random leftovers. Um, say you want to bring in a little spiciness into your bedroom, you might want to make sure there's no leftovers that your teenager might get a hold of, not knowing any better. Be logical about it. Or again, focus the intent on the specific people involved. Another way to make sure it's covered is if you're working with deities, especially, or ancestors or any other beings, you can always leave some for them as not part of the spell, but as an offering of thank you for helping me with this. Leave it for them. You could also leave it, I'm sorry, I'm going to say, if you don't believe in like deity per se, and you do believe more in like universal energy, you can do that. You can leave the offering to nature and the universe. I've known plenty of people who have done that and use the universe as their higher power, higher self, etc. So however you do, you can leave it as an offering. You can leave it to the animals, because for most spell work that we're going to be doing, it's not something that's going to it's not going to affect an animal in the way it would a person, because the whole brain process is different. I mean, now, if you're focused on just pure physical spiciness, then yeah, there might be. I don't know. I wouldn't risk it. But giving some back to nature is always good. And you can even mandate before you put it out there that any working left in it, any of the magical stuff left in it, is washed away and taken out before you actually leave the food. So that is pretty much that on the food. You can also do that with, the boiling the water on the stove with the spices and herbs and fruits and whatever in it to get the aroma going, which we can also cover later in more detail. But for now, that's pretty much kitchen witchery with food and the way that I do it. There's plenty more out there. Anything I say or do, please never use anyone you see online as your sole source of information. Go read a book, go online, go do your research. But these are just the things that I know and use the most, that I know work. So that's all for now. Next time I'm going to be talking, or next time I do kitchen witchery, I'm going to be talking more about the everyday things that you can do magic with. Everything from house cleaning to throwing out trash, We'll get to that on the next kitchen witch episode. So for now, Hope it doesn't sound too crazy. I hope it made sense to you. Hope you learned a little something, and y'all have a great time. Until next time. Bye bye.